This story begins with a family laughing at the one woman they thought Graham had abandoned. Sarah got no mansion, no money, no jewelry, just a rusty key, a locked ledger, and 30 days in a freezing cottage. But hidden inside those pages were decades of secrets, unpaid debts, fake success, stolen money. Every trail Beatrice had quietly recorded. The family believes Sarah Beatrice then left risks. By the end, she held the one thing more dangerous than money. Proof, and proof can destroy an empire.
I am Sarah Vance. 30 last Tuesday, I sat in a freezing law office watching my aunt smirk as Grandma's will was read. My cousin snatched the cash, the land, and the jewels. My aunt grabbed the lakeside estate. Jade took the offshore accounts while Liam kept the stocks. I was the only one who visited Grandma for years, yet my name never came up. My aunt sneered at my worn jacket, claiming I got what I deserved. But she missed the second envelope in the lawyeress bag, and what that package held cost my family every cent they thought they won. Before I reveal the secret, welcome to Legacy's Lies. Subscribe if you value loyalty. Drop a comment with your age and state. Now, back to that desk and the moment my aunt tried to erase me. The clock ticked a steady pulse. Outside, an autumn storm turned the river into a grey blur. The office smelled of stale coffee and dusty paper. Mr. Henderson sat at the head of the table, turning a heavy page. To my daughter Brenda, he read. Cold, flat. I leave the primary manor, the house, and all acreage. Brenda exhaled, her nails tapping nervously against the oak, finally stilled. She smoothed her cashmere sweater. As a vintage clothing expert, I noticed the stiff, synthetic drape. It was fake, just like her to my granddaughter, Jade, Henderson continued. I leave the liquid offshore accounts. Jade didn't look up from her phone. Just checked her lighting to my grandson. Lamb, he added. I watched my brother shift. He refused to meet my eyes, staring at a brass weight on the desk. I leave the domestic stocks and the commercial real estate shares. Henderson finished. Liam swallowed hard and nodded. The file thudded shut. My name was never spoken. I sat in silence, listening to the clock. I felt no sting of rejection, only a cold, sharp clarity. Beatrice, my grandmother, had raised me. She didn't make oversights. She made plans. Brenda broke the silence with a sigh of fake pity. I know this is tough, she said, her voice dripping with sugar, but Mother was a pragmatist. You chose a hobby over a career. She knew you couldn't handle capital. It is for the best. Liam flinched, staying quiet. Jade offered a thin, rehearsed smile. We will send you some knickknacks, Brenda added, rising to claim her victory. A vase or an old quilt for your collection. She reached for her coat. Sit down, Brenda. Henderson's voice was soft, yet it sucked the air from the room. Brenda froze, hand hovering near her collar. Henderson withdrew a thick, weathered envelope from his briefcase. The red wax seal bore Grandma S. personal crest. The main will is concluded, Henderson said, finally locking eyes with me. However, I was told to wait until the primary gifts were accepted. He broke the wax seal. The snap echoed louder than the clock. There is a second document. He held the envelope high. The mood shifted from triumphant to fragile. Brenda lowered her arm. Her synthetic sweater looked cheap. Henderson sliced the paper. The sharp tear made Liam flinch. He placed 2 items on the table with deliberate care. First, a heavy tarnished brass key. It bore a deep, dark patina, the grooves worn smooth. Second, a thick, worn leather ledger bound by a small brass lock. Henderson didn't smile. He looked at us like a surgeon delivering a grim diagnosis. This is not an addition to the estate, he stated, tapping the ledger. This is a separate binding contract. Beatrice established a blind trust independent of the court. Access is tied to this key. Brenda laughed, a sharp, breathless sound. A blind trust? Mother hated trusts. What is in it? Henderson ignored her. He looked only at me. Sarah, your grandmother outlined a specific residency clause. To inherit what this key secures, you must live in the old Weaveress cottage on the edge of the estate. You must live there alone for 30 days. No outside financial help. If you leave for even one night, the contract is void and the trust dissolves. Brenda laughed harder. Jade looked up, confused. Liam kept his eyes down, a muscle pulsing in his jaw. The Weaveress cottage, Brenda sneered, her confidence returning, that miserable shack in the woods. The draughty floorboards and the ancient hearth. Sarah, Mother isn't giving you an inheritance, she is giving you a chore, a punishment for playing with rags. Jade smirked, sliding her phone away. 30 days without heat. Have fun freezing to death, cousin. I stayed silent. I kept my eyes on the table, resting my fingertips against the ledger. The leather felt brittle. As I traced the binding, a faint scent rose peppermint oil and old paper. It was Grandma! It was the exact smell of her study, where she taught me to authenticate historical documents. My heart thumped. This wasn't punishment. Beatrice never acted out of spite. She acted out of strategy. The cottage was isolated. She was removing me from the family noise, giving me a place to focus. She was giving me an assignment. I looked at Henderson. I accept the terms. He nodded, pushing the key and ledger toward me. The 30-day clock starts at sundown. I dropped the items into my tote and walked out. The cold air hit like ice. The storm intensified, blanketing the streets in white. I climbed into my car. The engine rattled before starting. I cranked the heat, but it only blew lukewarm air against the frozen windshield. The drive to the estate took over an hour in the mounting snow. The roads wound through dense, bare forests. The wipers served as a metronome for my racing thoughts. I pictured Grandma in her study, sipping tea, calculating this exact scenario. Beatrice didn't build a legacy by leaving things to chance. If she left a locked ledger, it held answers. If she demanded, "I stay in the cottage," she knew those walls provided something the main house could not: protection, secrecy. I knew the cottage well. It was an 18th century relic, a rare survivor from the original land claim that predated our family in the state. Grandma spent a fortune preserving its structure, refusing to modernize it. No central heat, no hot water, and a roof pitched to shed heavy snow, but it had a stone hearth spring-watered and shelves of oil lamps. Because of my work, I spent my days analyzing colonial textiles. I understood the reality of historical living. I was ready. I knew how those cottage owners survived brutal winters. I could manage. But turning onto the private lane, my gut twisted. The snow was untouched, a perfect sheet of white. My tires spun wild before the all-wheel drive grabbed hold. I crested the hill and saw the cottage outline. Then I jammed the brakes. The car fishtailed anti-lock brakes, grinding against ice. I slid to a stop inches from a polished metal wall, parked sideways, blocking the path. Was a pristine black SUV, Cynthia S. car. She hadn't gone to the office, she sent it here. The SUV was wedged between two oaks, a total barrier, no way around. The banks dropped into a ravine. I left the engine running and stepped into the bitter wind. The cold stung my skin. I trudged through knee-deep snow to the barrier, wiping frost from the window. I peered inside, empty. The keys were gone. Cynthia had trapped me long before the lawyer opened that envelope. She knew the trust conditions, or she guessed Beatrice's final move. By blocking the road, she was forcing a legal default. If I couldn't reach the property line by sunset, or if I left to get a tow, the 30-day clause would void the contract. I stood in the swirling white. The sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows. Less than an hour left. Cynthia thought a locked car and a freezing mountain would break me. She thought. I was just the quiet niece who sold old blankets. My fingers gripped the brass key in my pocket. I killed the ignition. The engine went silent, leaving only the wind howling through the pines. Cynthia thought her luxury vehicle was an impenetrable fortress. She figured I would sit there, watch the gas gauge fall, and crawl back to town. She didn't know my son's stubborn streak. I slung my bag over my shoulder, pulled my collar tight, and stepped into the drifts. My boots crunched into the frozen crust. The temperature dropped as the sun vanished. Pine branches snapped under the ice. My lungs burned, but I kept my eyes on the path. 20 minutes of grueling climbing later, the dark silhouette of the cottage finally appeared. Built 3 centuries ago, this place was a fortress. Sloped roofs, tiny windows, and weathered shingles. I stepped onto the porch, stomping ice off my boots. My numb fingers found the rusted iron key hidden under a floorboard. The deadbolt groaned, but the door swung open. I hit the light switch. Nothing, I flipped it again. Total darkness. No power, panic tightened my chest. I rushed outside to check the meter. The conduit pipe was hanging loose. The rubber was sliced cleanly, exposing the copper. A yellow tag flapped in the wind, a local contractor logo. It read Winterization Disconnect, authorized by Cynthia Hall. She hadn't just blocked the road, she had weaponized the brutal winter. She knew the contract barred outside help. Calling an electrician on a holiday weekend would be a fortune and break my terms. She wanted me frozen out by midnight. I went back inside, locking the door against the storm. Pitch black. I felt my way along the walls until I hit the cold stone hearth. I grabbed the lantern and matches. I struck one, the sulphur flare burning bright. The flame bloomed steady and orange. I lit the wick and golden light flooded the room. Driving back the shadows, it hit the floor, revealing the antique loom, a massive, beautiful oak machine. It stood tall, a silent witness to the past. My pulse slowed. I was an appraiser. I knew how to handle historical artifacts now. I just had to live in one, but the hearth was empty. The woodpile was gone. Aunt Clara took every last log. My house was freezing without a fire. I'd never survive the night. I considered burning the floorboards when a rumble shook the walls, a truck engine. I scraped frost off. The glass headlights cut through the blizzard. A heavy pickup ploughed up the drive. A woman stepped into the gale. Sarah, my brother's wife, a sharp architect from Chicago with a knack for spotting structural rot. She always hated how Clara faked her high society life. I threw the door open. Sarah trudged inside with thermal blankets. "You refreezing," she said, pushing past. "Why are you here?" I asked, slamming the door. David said, "Stay out of this." She dropped the blankets. "David says a lot of things," she scoffed. "He thinks Clara's lockout is business. I know this blizzard, and I know your aunt. She plays dirty." She grabbed birch and cedar from her truck and dumped it on the hearth. "He told you not to help," I said, watching her work. "If Clara finds out, she'll punish him." Sarah struck a match. The cedar caught, warming the room. She peeled off her gloves. Her eyes were steady. "David lets fear run his life," she said quietly. "Blood makes you related. But showing up when the power is cut, that makes you family. Clara thinks she can bully you out of your inheritance. I won't let her win on a technicality." Sarah's grit was a sharp contrast to my brother's cowardice. She was risking her marriage for me. "I can to pay you for this wood," I warned. "The contract bans financial help." "Consider it a housewarming gift," Sarah said, zipping her coat. "I have to go if I stay. They'll say you weren't alone. Keep the fire going. Lock the doors." I watched her truck carve a path through the snow and vanish. The cabin was alive. The hearth roared, heating the stone. Warmth returned to my frozen limbs. I sat at the table, grabbing the leather ledger and the brass key. Firelight danced over the worn cover. As the material warmed, the sharp scent of peppermint oil filled the room. I slid the key into the lock. The mechanism clicked, it opened. I lifted the cover, expecting a diary or a letter, maybe a final half-hearted apology. What I found stole my breath. No personal musings here, just precise columns of dates, names, interest rates, and massive dollar amounts. Beside these figures, written in her signature, slanted cursive, were meticulous notes in striking red ink. It was a secret ledger, a master record of every hidden transaction, every favor leveraged, and every broken promise. As I traced the red ink, the truth hit me. My grandmother hadn't left me an empty inheritance. She had handed me a loaded weapon. Birch logs hissed in the hearth, spitting embers. I sat there, the lantern glowing over the pages. The room smelled of smoke, melting frost, and the medicinal tang of peppermint from the old paper. I ran my finger down the first column. Grandmother had handwriting from a lost era, perfect, mathematical, and written in stark black ink. As an appraiser, I knew how to spot a fake. My family, I quickly saw, were all frauds. Grandmother wasn't just a lonely widow. She was the secret bankroll for every relative who sneered at me in the boardroom. I turned the page. The header read, "Clara Vance, Luxury Imports." My aunt had spent a decade building an image as a self-made titan. She gave speeches and bragged about her business genius. The ledger told a different story. Clara hadn't built an empire. She built a house of cards on her mother's dime. Line after line showed massive wire transfers, 50,000 for payroll, 100,000 for a lease. But the margins floored me. She tracked a moral accounting too. My finger stopped at the bottom, where the black ink turned into harsh red. I read the note aloud, my voice ringing in the dark. April 14th, wired $200,000 to save Clarice margins. Asked her to stay for tea. She claimed her driver was waiting. The tea went cold. 8% interest applied. I stared at the red ink until the letters blurred. I remembered that day. I recalled pulling into the estate and seeing Clara SUV speeding away. I remembered walking in to find grandmother sitting alone, staring at 2 cold, untouched cups of tea. The weight of the ledger felt like the ground shifting. This wasn't just financial ruin. It was as an itemized receipt of an old woman's profound loneliness. Clara took the cash to save her vanity project, then couldn't spare 15 minutes for the mother who saved her. Grandmother had penalized her for the cruelty, quietly adding interest to the debt of a broken heart. I flipped the page. David, my brother, played the savvy developer, driving sports cars. According to the ledger, his last 3 property flips were entirely funded by grandmother. When a contractor walked off, she paid the bill. When a foundation cracked and the bank threatened foreclosure, she wired the bailout. Then there was Chloe, my cousin. She posed as a global influencer, posting photos from Dubai and Paris. The ledger showed those trips weren't sponsored by brands. They were funded by emergency cash requests sent to her grandmother. I found a $20,000 transfer for a yacht in the Mediterranean. The red ink simply noted that Chloe called in tears about her image. I paid the captain, did not receive a thank you note. They were parasites. They drained her wealth for their own vanity, then mocked me for my work. Grandmother had watched it all happen. She kept the receipts, locked them away, and handed me the key. She gave me the sword to cut through their lies. My phone buzzed, shattering the silence. It rattled on the table, casting a harsh blue glow. Clara's name flashed. I checked the time past midnight. Outside, the storm was still throwing ice. I swiped the screen. "I didn't say a word, Megan," Clara said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I am so glad you have a signal. I have been worrying about you." I watched the firelight hit the red ink. "Did you hire someone to cut the power lines?" I asked. Clara let out a dismissive sigh. That was scheduled maintenance. "Listen, sweetheart, I know you want to prove a point, but it is freezing. That shack is an icebox. You will get sick playing pioneer." "I am perfectly warm," I replied, my voice steady. Clara ignored me. "I want to help, Megan. I will write you a personal check for $10,000. Pack your bags. Come down the mountain and stay at the lodge. You can start a little shop. You do not need to suffer for some blind trust that probably only has a few old bonds." She was fishing, testing me to see if I opened the ledger. If I had the power. I locked the cover. The metal click echoed. "I don't need your money." "Clara, I am staying the month." The fake warmth vanished. Her voice turned jagged. "You arrogant, ungrateful girl," she snapped. "You think you are better than us." I was trying to be generous to my sister's child. "You were trying to buy a default," I corrected. Clara gasped. "You want war? Fine. That cottage isn't up to code. No heat, no plumbing. I will call a judge at dawn. I am having the property condemned. The sheriff will drag you off that mountain by noon. Enjoy your last night in the cold, Megan." The line went dead. I set the phone down. The war started. Clara thought this was just a property battle. She had no idea. I was sitting in the dark, armed with the evidence to burn her world down. I added a log to the fire and waited for the sun. Day 5 arrived bitter and clear. Clara never sent the sheriff. Officers were slow during the holiday. She realized the legal route was too sluggish. They wanted me broken now. If they couldn't freeze me out, they would starve me out. The target shifted from Clara to my cousin. Chloe began her campaign from a Boston penthouse. It started Tuesday. My phone buzzed on the table. Then chaos. A storm of alerts flooded my screen. I opened my inbox. My clients, curators, and top textile collectors were turning on me. Subject lines read like obituaries for my career. Cancellations, questions. The Boston Historical Society dropped me. Their director cited reports online that questioned my professional integrity. I checked my business profile. My 5-star rating had tanked. Dozens of anonymous trolls posted brutal reviews. They claimed I faked colonial fabrics, took kickbacks, and scammed folks out of heirlooms. Chloe owned a digital empire. Millions of followers and bot networks designed to manipulate algorithms. She turned her entire machine against me, just to ruin my life. In the antique textile game, image is everything. One rumor of fraud is a death sentence. Chloe was spreading lies across the industry. My phone buzzed again. Another client cancelled. I paced the cabin, shivering, fighting off the panic. If the business folded, I would be penniless. When I left this mountain, they wanted me to abandon the residency to save my firm. I flipped my phone over. I refused to let Chloe win. I needed something tangible. My gaze settled on a quilt hanging on the wall, a mid-19th century trapunto piece. It was a complex style where stitches outline patterns, stuffed with wool to add depth. A feather wreath design bordered in deep indigo. I stepped closer, tracing the raised stitching. Usually the textures kept me grounded, but as my fingers brushed the edge, something felt off. The vintage cotton was thin as paper, but the backing felt stiff. I angled my lamp, spotting an artificial shine on the thread. Authentic 19th century quilts used natural fibers. This had a synthetic nylon glare. The stitching was machine perfect. Grandma was a total purist. She only used modern thread to hide something. I grabbed my seam ripper, sliding it under the synthetic edge. As the seam popped, a corner of yellowed paper peeked out. My breath hitched. This house was a vault. Grandma had turned her home into a fortress. I pulled a thick manila folder from the hollow quilt. It wasn't about antiques, it was legal trouble. A cease and desist from a jewelry designer accused Chloe Hall lifestyle brands of theft. Attached was a $50,000 settlement check signed by Grandma. I kept digging, 6 settlements total. Chloe's entire brand was built on lies, using her grandmother to pay off victims. Every deal was countersigned by Grandma with angry red notes. Chloe begged for another bailout. She wrote before she died. She threatened to cut me off if I did not pay the artist. The note read Chloe was a hollow girl, and I had the proof. If this leaked, her brand would be finished. My phone buzzed Maya. "I picked up Megan," she said, her voice crackling. "Seen your page?" "I am watching the reviews," I said. Maya exhaled. "I called a favor. My firm's IT had traced, the IP addresses hitting your site. They are using proxies," Maya said. "But my guy is good." He traced the traffic back to a luxury condo in Boston. "Close building." "Exactly," Maya confirmed. "She hired a firm to nuke your reputation. I have the logs linking the attack to her private network. I can send the file." "Send it," I said. "Thank you, do not thank me yet," she warned. "This is just the start." "Ethan and Cynthia are planning something too. Stay alert." I hung up and the file download finished. I had the digital trail linking Chloe to the smear and the proof she was a fraud. I grabbed the leather ledger and added my own notes in black ink. The ledger was now a weapon. She did not realize her house was covered in gasoline, and I was holding the match. The secrets in these walls neutralized her attack. I spent days waiting, ignoring the threats. Then, on the 11th morning, the wind died and a heavy silence fell. The snow stopped. I was by the hearth when I heard a distinct crunch on the porch, a heavy boot on frozen wood. Someone had made it up the road. The digital assault had faded. But the silence felt like the calm before a tsunami. They were changing tactics. The second week was all about my brother, Silas. He played the peacemaker at family events, wearing Italian suits and ordering top-shelf scotch. But his success was a facade built entirely on Grandma's checkbook. Without her cash to cover failed deals, Silas was broke. Desperate men make dangerous moves. By day 15, I was deep into a brutal routine. Every morning I swung a heavy iron maul against frozen logs to keep the fires burning. I actually left the door unlocked, trusting the remote location. A bad mistake. After hauling wood inside, I tended the hearth and checked the pine floorboards for loose spots. Grandma had covered the floors with heavy vintage rugs. One spot in the center felt off. It was a mid-19th century tapestry. I knelt, feeling the floor dip. One board had no standard nails. I jammed a screwdriver into the seam and popped it out. I pried up the board and found a black leather portfolio. It contained a record of my brother Julian S. private demons. pages filled with offshore wire transfers to the Caymans and brutal notices from betting rings. He had burned through hundreds of thousands. Grandma had paid his debts twice, leaving notes about his utter lack of discipline. His debt was mounting, and the syndicates were closing in. That explained why he took his inheritance without a fight. He needed to sell the estate fast. While I was digging through his ruin, a real nightmare began outside. He had parked his sedan half a mile away, hiking through the snow, thinking I was still at the woodpile. He crept onto the porch, clutching a steel pry bar. He eyed the window, planning to force it and steal the ledger. He made a huge mistake underestimating the women in this family. Maya had driven up to drop off groceries. She spotted his tracks and followed. As he jammed the bar under the frame, a rotted piece of trim snapped under his boot. The cracks sounded like a gunshot. Julian froze, turning slowly. Maya stood at the base of the steps, staring at him with cold disgust. A grown man, shivering in the snow, trying to break into his own grandmother's home. Maya spoke with icy precision. She told him to drop the tool. Maya dropped her bag. She called his name, her voice hard as stone. She knew he was drowning in debt and trying to rob his own sister. I walked to the window. I watched him drop the bar. It thudded into the snow and vanished. His facade of success collapsed. Maya did not even look at him as she stepped past to knock on my door. Julian lingered for a minute before retreating, leaving a trail of shameful footprints. Maya came in, shaking not from the cold, but from the realization her marriage was a total lie. I handed her the portfolio. She scanned the offshore receipts. The man she married was a parasite. Maya stared into the flames with new, dangerous resolve. She whispered that he would call the estate lawyers the second he hit his car. Desperate men make reckless deals. If he could not steal the ledger, he would try to seize the land by force. We had to call my lawyer, Julian. I locked the heavy oak door just as the sun climbed over the ridge. The storm left the mountain under a blinding, icy glaze. I steered my car down the road, crunching over Julian's frozen tracks. 20 miles out, I pulled into a diner near an old logging route, a place smelling of burnt coffee, perfect for a secret meeting. Julian Pierce waited in a back booth, his charcoal suit looking sharp against the red vinyl. Grandma hired him years ago for his ruthless approach to asset protection. He treated law like a scalpel. He skipped the small talk. As I slid into the booth, he folded his hands over his briefcase. He asked if I had survived the 2 weeks. I told him about the smear campaign and the break-in attempt, keeping my voice low. He just nodded. Desperation always leads to bad choices. I set the heavy brass key on the table. Told him I found the hidden ledgers. My siblings were drowning in debt, and Grandma had been bankrolling their entire lives. Julian picked up the key, turning it over. He corrected me. She funded their illusions. And she never gave a cent without securing her investment first. He pulled out thick legal folders. That key opens a vault at a regional bank in Burlington. As executor, I was authorized to pull these files. Once I had the ledger, he flattened his hand on the top folder. The items under the floor were sentimental, but these were the corporate facts. He slid a document over. It hissed as it skidded across the tabletop. I scanned the header, Granite Holdings. Julian S. tone shifted. Your grandmother locked this trust 20 years ago. She was not running a charity. When Cynthia needed cash, Beatrice made her sign a pledge. When Julian faced ruin, Beatrice filed liens. I stared at the legal jargon, the reality sinking in. I knew fabrics, not corporate law. A financing statement is a public lien. It prioritizes creditors. If a debtor fails, you are toast. Not unsecured loans, I whispered. Exactly, Julian said. Beatrice locked everything down. She holds liens on Cynthia S. inventory, their condos, and the voting rights for Julian S. Holdings. He leaned in as trustee. You own their debt and their collateral. The diner noise faded. I was stunned. I wasn't just a niece fighting for a cottage. I was the majority stakeholder in their lives. Beatrice staged a hostile takeover and put me in charge. Execute these, Julian noted, and you seize Cynthia's company. You can freeze accounts, liquidate assets, foreclose on their entire lifestyle. You hold the keys to the family empire. I touched the paper, head spinning. Adrenaline surged. I wanted to drive back and evict them right now. Julian noticed my posture, pressing his hand over the documents to pull them back. "Not yet," he warned. "Why not?" I challenged. "I have proof. The trust is conditional," Julian stated. Granite Holdings stays dormant until that 30-day residency ends. Reveal these now and Cynthia files an injunction, tying you up in court for years. He shut his briefcase. Fail to finish those 15 days, and the assets go to charity. My siblings would walk away free. You would lose everything. The trap was set. I had to return to that freezing cabin. "They won't stop," I said, staring at the snow. Julian nodded grimly. "You're right. Your brother is a nuisance. But Cynthia is dangerous. She plays for keeps and will escalate. She will move from petty games to real force. She might use guards to drag you off that land." He stood up. "Go back, Megan. Keep the fire burning. Stay locked in. Don't reveal the blade until it's at their throats." I watched Julian leave. I pocketed the key, feeling the weight of impending ruin. I drove up the mountain. The silence felt like a threat. It felt like a held breath. Cynthia thought she was fighting a peasant for dirt. I braced for the hit in my cabin, but 50 miles away, the family-esque ruin was already detonating. It started in Ethan and Maya's kitchen. Maya arrived late, coat still on. She strode to the island and dumped the black folder onto the marble. Ethan, drink in hand, looked up from real estate listings, expecting comfort. Instead, he saw wire receipts and collection notices. He went pale. His developer facade crumbled. He tried to spin a lie, but failed. "How much?" Maya asked, voice deadly calm. Ethan swallowed. 400,000, he whispered. "It grows weekly. The sports books want cash." Maya stood there, watching her world collapse. "You tried to rob your own sister to save yourself. You trashed Grandma's place while she lived there," Ethan pleaded, but she pulled away. "Cynthia has a plan," he said. "A developer wants the estate for a luxury resort. $12 million. Closing is in 7 days. Maya shook her head. "The estate is in probate. No clear title. No sale." Ethan insisted Cynthia held the deed. "If Megan stays, the deal dies. Cynthia wants her gone this week." "How?" Maya demanded. Ethan stared at his drink. "She is hiring private security to evict her tonight." The kitchen went dead silent. Ethan waited for his wife to defend him. She didn't. Maya ripped off her rings. "I married an ambitious man, not a coward." Ethan panicked as she dropped the platinum bands. They hit the marble with a sharp, final ring. "I am filing for divorce in the morning." Maya didn't flinch. "Don't contact my office." She walked out, driving through the freezing night toward the estate. She reached my cottage near midnight. I threw the bolt, shocked by her arrival. "They are coming tonight," she gasped, slamming the heavy lock shut. Ethan confessed it all. "Cynthia needs the land empty for a $12 million deal and hired contractors to drag you out." My blood ran cold. "Mercenaries?" I reached for my phone to call the police. Maya stopped me. "The sheriff won't touch a civil dispute, and by the time you file, you will be off the property, and the trust will dissolve. You cannot leave this cabin." She was right. "Any movement off the property line triggers the clause." I grabbed a splitting maul. Maya dragged a heavy antique chair over. Together, we shoved the solid oak table against the door. We barricaded the door and nailed the windows shut until the cottage felt like a tomb. We sat by the hearth in silence. Maya's finger caught the firelight. No ring. She had risked everything to be here. She chose family over blood. Then the silence shattered. Headlights cut through the trees, strobing against the snow. Heavy engines rumbled. Maya gripped my arm. The vehicles pulled up just past the porch. The engines idled, shaking the foundation. I heard doors slam, then the crunch of tactical boots on frozen snow. No knocking. They were here to breach. The final offensive had arrived. The boots stopped at the bottom of the stairs. I clutched them all, ready for the wood to splinter, then 3 sharp, polite knocks. "Megan Hall," a muffled voice called. "My name is Arthur Vance. I am here for your Aunt Cynthia Hall to inventory the artifacts." Maya and I stared at each other. They didn't send muscle. They sent an appraiser. I cracked the door. A man stood there in a tailored wool coat, looking ridiculous in the Vermont wild. "Good evening," he said, flashing a slick smile. Cynthia hired me for an urgent inventory of the antiques for a Manhattan auction. I saw it immediately. Cynthia knew an eviction would trigger criminal charges, so she sent a Trojan horse. This man was a corporate spy here to photograph my ledgers. I stood my ground. Ethical guidelines forbid appraisals in a blizzard in the dark, I said. He chuckled. My client is motivated, he countered. It would be a shame to report you blocked a lawful inventory. He was threatening me with a breach of contract. I pulled the door open. Arthur stepped inside, eyes darting everywhere. He studied the floor, the shelves, and my bag. Fascinating, he murmured. He pulled out a high-resolution camera, not the tools of an appraiser. He moved toward a chest, covered in a fragile 17th-century silk panel. Arthur reached out to flip the fabric. "Do not touch that," I snapped. He smirked. "I need to examine the warp and weft Megan's standard procedure." My fury peaked. I stepped into his space. If you knew anything about 17th century silk, you would know it uses silver gilt thread on a silk core. Your hand oils will destroy it. You need nitrile gloves and proper light, Arthur, Cess smirk faltered. You are no appraiser, I said. You are a corporate spy looking for a ledger. But you made a mistake. You stepped into my domain. One call to the antiquities community, and your reputation is toast. You will never work in a gallery again. Panic replaced his confidence. He knew he was talking to a professional. Cynthia is paying me, he stuttered. She said you were hiding family papers and told me to photograph them. She played you, I said. Go back empty-handed and she will dump you. I have a deal. Arthur froze, camera shaking. I pulled a manila folder from my bag. It was filled with fake financial records made days ago. I had cooked the books to look like Beatrice lost her fortune right before she died. The papers made it look like the estate was bankrupt. I shoved the fake spares away. Tell Cynthia you found these under a floorboard during the storm. Get her the photos tonight? Arthur stared, mind racing. Why would I help you? Because if you listen, I will act like you were never here. I promised. You keep your pay. You keep your reputation and walk away from this family mess for good. Refuse, and I will ruin you by morning. He did not hesitate. He grabbed his camera and zoomed in. He snapped photos of the fake ruined flash strobing the cottage. He tucked the camera away. I will tell her this is all I found, Arthur said, his arrogance gone. Get out, I told him. He bolted, scrambling down the porch. His engine roared as he sped off the mountain. Maya approached. That was risky, she said. What happens when Cynthia sees those photos? I watched the logs burn. She will believe Beatrice died with nothing. She will think the holdings are empty. She will panic, and a panicked woman, Maya realized, makes reckless mistakes. Exactly, I said. Cynthia is out of time. She will rush that illegal sale to pay her debts. She is walking into the trap. We wait. Day 30 broke with blinding clarity. The storm left the forest iced. I watched the last logs turn to ash. The cabin was freezing, but I barely felt it. The residency clause was met. I survived the smear, the theft, and the spy. The trap was sprung. I grabbed the leather ledger, locked it, and shoved it into my bag with Arthur as fake docs. I pushed the heavy door open and stepped out. The world was dead silent. No looking back. My work here was done. I headed down the mountain. The access road was packed hard by traffic. The climb took under 30 minutes. Near the trees, the silence vanished under the hum of heavy machinery. Through the pines, I spotted the iron gates. A fleet of vehicles filled the driveway, excavators, trucks, and black sedans. Cynthia never hesitated. After buying those fake photos, she assumed the estate was her final payday and rushed to close the $12 million sale before creditors noticed. I emerged from the trees. Brenda leaned against a black SUV, wearing a bright crimson coat. 2 lawyers held papers out to her. Kevin stood nearby, scowling at the heavy machinery. He was desperate for cash to settle his gambling markers. I walked toward them. Boots crunching on the gravel. A twig snapped like a gunshot. Brenda spun around, face draining of colour. Megan? She gasped. You were supposed to be at the mountain cabin. The 30-day residency clause is finished, Brenda, I said. My voice sharp. Kevin stepped up, panic in his eyes. You cannot just walk in here. This deal is closing and you have zero authority. Before I could reply, a silver sedan and a van pulled up. Julian Pierce stepped out, flanked by 2 process servers. He strode past Kevin like he was invisible. "Gentlemen," Julian called out, stopping the developers. "I am Julian Pierce, executor of the Beatrice estate. Put your pens down," the lead developer scoffed. "We are handling a title transfer. Brenda has the deed." She clutched the SUV, knuckles turning white. "I have the probate papers," she hissed. "Mother gave this to me." Julian opened his case. He ignored the probate file and pulled out a single watermarked page. "The primary will is just one piece of this," he said. "Beatrice created a blind trust, Granite Holdings, 2 decades ago. The property was moved into the trust long before her death." Brenda stared at the document, her confidence crumbling. "The trust?" she stammered. "Arthur swore it was empty." I glared at her. Arthur Vance is an amateur who could not read a contract if his life depended on it. He showed you fake papers I created specifically to trap you. You believed them because your greed made you blind." The developer stepped back. Furious, he turned to Brenda. "You promised this title was clear. You lied." Brenda looked at Kevin, but my brother was backing away from the servers. "If you sign," Julian warned the developers, "you are committing fraud. Granite Holdings owns the master deed. Brenda has no legal right to sell." The developer snatched his papers back. He glared at Brenda. "You tried to rope us into wire fraud. Our legal team will be sending you a bill for this." He marched to his car. "Let's go," he yelled. The trucks shifted into reverse, leaving Brenda stranded in the driveway. She dropped the gold pen and it skittered under a tire. She slumped against the SUV, looking broken. Kevin realized the game was over. He turned to me, hands raised in a pathetic plea. "Megan, please!" he begged, voice cracking. "You do not understand. They have leverage. We are family." He tried to move closer, but Maya stepped in his way. Her eyes were cold as ice. "You lost the right to call us family a long time ago, Kevin." She shoved a thick envelope against his chest. "These are your divorce papers," Maya told him. "My lawyer filed them this morning. Keep the debt. I am keeping my life." Kevin stood frozen, his world collapsing. Maya turned to join me. The threat was gone. Julian Pierce gave me a subtle nod. "The residency requirement is met, Megan. The trust is active." I walked right past Brenda, who was staring blankly at the snow. I ignored Kevin entirely. I marched up the stone steps, pulled the heavy key from my pocket, and turned the lock. The mechanism clicked. I pushed the door open, walking inside, not as a desperate niece, but as the master of the estate. The bitterness was finally behind me. The foyer smelled of lemon oil, just like my childhood. It was finally quiet, not the silence of neglect, but the stillness of a home waiting for its leader. Julian followed, his shoes clicking on the marble. We entered the library. Beatrice had spent her last years in this room, surrounded by thousands of books. Julian set his briefcase on the antique desk and opened it. "No more playing defense," he said, pulling out a thick stack of documents. I stood by the window, watching Brenda and Kevin looking tiny in the driveway. "You have cleared the residency clause," Julian said, laying the papers out. "It is time to trigger Ironwood Holdings." I approached the desk. The documents gave me total executive control. Julian handed me a small box. It was Grandmother S1950's fountain pen. It was a vintage Parker, its barrel gleaming in the light. Grandmother used this for every major contract. I took the cap off. The gold nib caught the morning sun. I pressed the tip to the parchment. Black ink flowed, locking my signature into place. Everything changed in a single stroke. I was no longer a beggar fighting for a house. I was the chief executive officer of a massive trust. I held the keys to the kingdom. "We need a full audit." I ordered, "Bring me the asset schedules." Julian handed me the financial ledgers. I sat at the mahogany desk. I was an appraiser by trade. I knew how to find truth in the details for hours. I cross-referenced the cottage records with Julian S. files. Grandmother had been brilliant. She had built a perfect system of control. Every cent she gave Brenda, Kevin, or Sophie was tied to ironclad pledge agreements. She owned the equity in Brenda S. Brand. She held liens on Kevin S. real estate. She controlled the voting rights for Sophie S. Company. I stared at my signature, sitting next to Grandmother S. notes. Her plan was clear. She did not leave me this trust for my own comfort. She left me Ironwood Holdings because she knew the money was toxic. It turned my family into leeches. She gave me the power to break them. I hold the voting rights to Brenda's firm, I said, scanning the ledger. Julian nodded. You control the board. You can freeze her assets today. What about Kevin's estate? I asked. The liens give you priority. Julian confirmed. You can force the sale of his properties immediately. I leaned back. Total power. I could dismantle their lives with one phone call. Get the notices ready. Julian linked his encrypted laptop to a portable printer. The machine whirred, spitting out cold, hard notices of default and seizure. Julian ripped the last page off and collated the stack. He grabbed a brass stamp and red wax from his bag. He melted the wax on the top document and pressed the seal deep into the resin. The Sterling Trust crest stood out, a mark of absolute power. The notices are ready, Julian said. I placed my hand on the pile. The wax was still warm. This was the weapon I had been waiting to use. My phone buzzed. It was Sarah. She had stayed out of the fight while the others tried to evict me. Now she had heard the news. I answered. Megan? Sarah's voice turned brittle. That influencer facade? Shattered, she said. Julian triggered a blind trust and blocked the asset sale. I checked the seizure notices, Sarah, I said. Cold as stone. Check your mail tomorrow. I hung up. The defense's phase was over. Clutching the legal files, I marched to the library. Time to teach them what happens when you cross me. Julian Pierce moved with the precision of a corporate hitman. No mail, he hired private process servers to ensure the documents were unavoidable. The hammer fell on a Tuesday while I was appraising an antique rug. The net tightened across 3 states. Brenda was served in Boston right in the middle of a high-stakes board meeting. The server walked straight in. Ignoring the front desk, he marched into the boardroom and slammed a red sealed folder onto the glass table. The terms were brutal. $4 million, due in 14 days. Otherwise, Sterling Trust would liquidate her brand and accounts. Kyle got hit at a Connecticut golf course. He was charming investors on the 18th green when a server tapped his shoulder. Total asset freeze. Only Diane was caught at home. The server brushed past security, heading straight for her penthouse door. The demand was for the emergency cashed grandmother, wired 5 years ago. By Wednesday, the receipts hit my desk. A heavy thud, the sound of total victory. The 12-week countdown began. Panic started to set in. Diane hit back first. She went live from her living room, no makeup, just a plain sweater. The classic victim costume. She sobbed for 20 minutes, claiming a jealous relative swindled our dying grandmother. A total fabrication. My team was ready. Alina had left engineering to lead my strategy. She watched the stream without blinking. Time to bury this fraud, she muttered. Fingers flying across the keys, she launched a digital strike. She used IP logs to trace the smear campaign back to Diane's own Wi-Fi. Then she leaked the receipts' hidden agreements proving grandmother had bailed out the very designers Diane cheated. Alina leaked the proof to Diana's sponsors and major media outlets. The collapse was instant. By dinner, her biggest beauty brand dropped her for unethical conduct. Blogs went wild with the documents. Diane went from victim to con artist overnight. Her numbers tanked, she wiped her channel and went dark. Her reputation was officially toasted. Kaila's fall was quieter but final. His status was built on smoke and mirrors. Once bankers saw the legal notices, rumors of his debt spread like wildfire. Partners ran an emergency audit. They realized his investments weren't his. They were debts tied to a trust he couldn't control. They cut him loose immediately. Kyle was stranded with half-finished projects and zero cash. Loan sharks were closing in. Brenda tried to fight in court, claiming fraud. Julian was 2 steps ahead. He filed the 3 separate mental health reports grandmother cleared before the trust was formed. Those reports were ironclad. The judge tossed Brenda's case and ordered her to pay all legal fees. The 14 days were up. Silence fell over the family, the spies, the threats, the drama all gone, crushed by the law. On the final night, freezing rain lashed the estate. I sat in my library, waiting for midnight to claim their assets. The clock hit 11. Less than an hour left. A sharp buzz pierced the quiet. I looked up. The gate intercom flashed red. Julian set his pen down. Alina stopped typing. I hit the button. It was Alice. Her voice was thin, ragged, the arrogance long gone, begging me to open the gate, barely audible over the storm. I checked the monitor. The lights hit the iron gates. There they were, Brenda and Kyle, soaked and shaking in the downpour. No fancy cars. A taxi had just left them stranded. No luggage, no legal defense. They were here to surrender. I clicked off the intercom, letting the silence ring. The wall had landed on my doorstep. I hit the release. The heavy gates groaned open. I watched from the window as they trudged up the drive. Rain poured down, no umbrellas, heads hanging low. It took 10 agonizing minutes to reach the steps. I didn't get up. Julian stayed by the fire, calm. Alina watched from the dark corner. We let them walk into the hall alone. The library doors pushed open. They stepped inside, dripping water everywhere. A month ago they sat here like royalty now. Their clothes were ruined, drenched by the storm. Brenda gripped her bag. She shivered and it slipped, hitting the floor with a hollow plastic thud. Not designer leather, a cheap knockoff. That sound told the whole story, a pathetic fake, just like her. Mark spoke first, wiping rain from his face. His voice cracked, losing that smooth, wealthy edge. He used my name, begging me to release the liens, just long enough for a bridge loan. He played the family card, trying to erase the past month like it was nothing. He said, "Family protects family." I didn't flinch. I listened to the rain, thinking about the time he tried to break into my home. I let his desperation hang there until the silence became unbearable. He looked away. Brenda stepped forward, teeth chattering, claiming grandmother never intended for the money to be used this way. She insisted. Mother loved them, then begged for forgiveness. She even offered me a seat at her table in exchange for mercy. I stayed perfectly calm, no need to shout. I pulled the heavy leather ledger across the mahogany desk. The lock clicked. The scent of peppermint oil filled the room, cutting through the smell of wet wool. They stared at the book. Terrified, I flipped to Brenda's section. I scanned the debts in black ink, then pointed to the harsh red marks in the margins. I told her, I wasn't auditing her money, I was auditing her character. I started reading the records. The cash wires, the fake tea dates. Brenda played the victim, but the game was over. I looked her in the eye. "You owe me 52 missed dinners and 100 abandoned cups of tea." She turned ghost white. I turned toward Mark. I found the notes. Grandmother paid his gambling debts while he bought sports cars instead of visiting her at the hospice. "You don't owe money, Mark. You owe her the time you stole." He stared at his shoes. No defense. I slammed the ledger shut. "Family is not a shield for your sins." I gestured toward Alina. "She stayed loyal while you two used grandmother like an ATM. You treated me like a peasant. Now pay up. Brenda didn't even try to fake it." She collapsed, sobbing on the floor. The manipulation was dead. No charm left, just a cold, hard wall. She begged to keep her brand, but I felt nothing. The 14 days were up. The takeover was official. Mark finally realized the road had ended. I had a plan, no more handouts. They would work off their debt starting tomorrow. Julian walked in at 8 with the contracts. The storm was gone, replaced by a brutal frost. Time to talk business. They looked small, in borrowed clothes, no labels, no ego. I slid the documents to my brother. Mark was decent at real estate, but he wasted it on status. I stripped his titles. The firm took everything. Julian sold the sports cars to clear the gambling debts. Alina handed over the divorce papers. Mark didn't fight. He signed with a shaking hand. He lost his wealth and his marriage in one go. I sent him to a construction crew. He is a junior contractor now. Steel-toed boots replaced the suits. He has to learn what $1 is worth. Brenda was tougher. Her company was a total lie. I authorized the hostile takeover by noon. The audit confirmed my gut feeling. She used sweatshops while selling luxury organics. I told Alina to leak it to the press. Her stores closed. By afternoon, the empire vanished. I gave her one choice manual labor in a remote mountain cabin. She used to laugh at my career. Now, she would weave textiles by hand. I kept 80% of her wages to pay down the debt. I drove her up in my truck. She stared out the window, pale and shaking. I left her with a manual and a pile of wool. She touched the loom, realizing her new reality. She would spend her days in the isolation she once planned for me. I left her by the hearth. I touched the ledger. Grandmother used this book to track their greed. I used it to cut the rot from our family. It was finished. I shoved the book into the library safe, locked it, and tucked the key away. We dumped the dead weight. It was time to build. Our company, Apex Heritage, needed a new vision. We turned the old estate into a historical restoration hub. Clara built climate-controlled vaults in the guest wing. I landed contracts with major museums. We became experts in antique restoration. The manor used to reek of entitlement. Now it was a place of real work. The war was over. 1 year later, the air felt clean. We called it the Thorn Centre for Textile Art. The house smelled like cedar and old archives. Clara was in the East Wing, checking blueprints. She was blending modern glass into the old timber frame perfectly. Clara was a new woman without her deadbeat ex. She was a true partner now, running the floor. Our team restored ancient tapestries with genuine grit. Down in the valley, Brad was a year into his manual labour job. He looked rough, but he paid his bills. He lived in a tiny studio, broke but honest. I left the house late. The driveway, once jammed with luxury cars, was empty. I walked toward the cottage with a hot drink. I peered through the window. Sarah was at an antique loom. She worked the shuttle with a steady, rhythmic grace. Her hands were stained with natural dye. She caught a snag in the thread. A year ago, she would have panicked now. She patiently rethreaded it herself. She looked tired, but she stood taller. She was paying her dues, 1 inch at a time. I sat on the porch with Mom's favourite mug. Mint and pine filled the air. Everything clicked. My plan was set. Real legacy is character, not cash. Grandma knew wealth without grit just creates parasites. She pushed me hard, forcing me to forge my own path. This wasn't luck. I outlasted the storm. If family betrayed you, hear this being underestimated is your secret weapon. Guard your peace. I learned 3 truths. First, blood ties aren't a free pass to hurt me. Second, forgive them, but keep your distance. Third, your worth isn't set by those who can afford you. Life moves on just like a loom. We obsess over mansions and trust funds, forgetting that kids just want our time. Behind those perfect social media photos hides a dark secret. Cold silence and sharp comparisons. Family drama always shows the ugly cost of playing favourites. Love shouldn't be a scoreboard. Kids taught that love is a transaction grow up empty. Meanwhile, the outcast feels like nothing. We must stop ignoring their pain. True wealth comes from integrity. When we fix every problem with a check, we destroy resilience. A parent's job isn't handing over an empire, it's teaching how to build one. Easy money ruins your moral compass, but trading presents for a paycheck is the biggest failure. Every time a parent ignores feelings for status, it leaves a scar. Don't let your bonds freeze while chasing titles. Emotional fairness makes a child feel seen. We define family by loyalty, not just blood. Here are 3 rules to move on. First, DNA doesn't earn the right to abuse you. Second, change requires action, not empty apologies. Forgiveness is just for your own peace. Third, set your own worth. Never let people who can see your value write your story. This is a roadmap for your future. Check your own life, see whose struggles you re-ignoring. If this hits home, subscribe and share your story. Integrity is worth celebrating. Look at your family tonight. Forget the fake smiles. Watch the quiet moments. If you had to audit your emotional life, would you be brave enough to face the truth?